Dae-ho Kim stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. The room was huge, bigger than any building on Earth. Crystal walls reached up so high that he could barely see the top. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, making the alien faces around him glow like ghosts. He had been Earth's voice in this place for 10 years. 10 years of trying to make the other species understand that humans were not monsters. 10 years of explaining why humans did what they did. 10 years of watching fear grow in alien eyes every time he spoke. Today was different. Today they were voting to kick humanity out of the galaxy. The human species has proven too dangerous, said Speaker Velthon, a tall blue creature with too many arms. They play with time itself. They make weapons that tear space apart. They spread across star systems like a virus. Dae-ho wanted to stand up and shout. He wanted to tell them that humans had also brought medicine that saved billions of alien lives, that human engineers had fixed broken worlds, that human farmers had taught dying species how to grow food again. But he stayed quiet. He had learned that shouting only made things worse. The Valthari delegation sat in their golden chairs, looking down at him with disgust. They were the most powerful species in the council. What they wanted usually happened. Their leader, High. Commander Zethra had made it clear from the start. Humans were too wild, too unpredictable. They needed to go. They ignore our laws, continued Velthon. They research forbidden science. Just last month, their scientist Dr. Minho Lee claimed he could predict the future of time itself. This is madness. Dae-ho thought about Dr. Lee. The old scientist had come to him 3 days ago, eyes wide with worry. Dae-ho, he had said, I found something terrible in my research. Time is going to break. Not today, not tomorrow, but it will happen. In about 850 years, time itself will start to slow down and stop. We need to warn everyone. But when Dr. Lee had presented his findings to the Council's Science Division, they had laughed. Some had even called it a human trick to stay important in galactic politics. The voting started. One by one, the species raised their hands or tentacles or whatever they used to say yes or no. The crystalline hive voted to remove humans. The thermal collective voted to remove humans. The gas cloud entities voted to remove humans. Each vote felt like a punch to Dae-ho's chest. These beings had once called humans friends. They had traded with Earth. They had shared knowledge and stories. Now they wanted humans gone. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Captain Sojin Park stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance. Her ship was one of the newest in the human fleet, built with technology that combined human creativity with alien knowledge. The stars outside looked peaceful, but Sojin knew that peace was about to end. Her communication officer, Lieutenant Tae-Wan Jung, looked up from his station. Captain, we're getting emergency signals from all human colonies. The Council has given us 72 hours to leave all Council space. Sojin closed her eyes for a moment. She had known this day might come. The other species had been getting more and more nervous about human expansion. Humans built things fast. They learned quickly. They asked too many questions about how the universe worked. How many people do we need to evacuate? She asked. 3 million humans spread across 47 worlds and space stations, Tae-Wan replied. Some of the colonies have been there for 50 years. People have built whole lives there. Sojin nodded. Send messages to all human ships. Begin immediate evacuation procedures. Civilian transports get priority for dock space. Military vessels will provide escort. On the planet Kepler 442b, Hye Jin Choi was working in her engineering lab when the evacuation order came through. She was 25 years old and had never seen Earth. This planet was her home. She had helped build the fusion reactors that powered the whole colony. Her friends were here. Her life was here. But now she had to pack everything into 2 small bags and leave forever. Her grandfather's pocket watch sat on her workbench. It was old, made on Earth over 100 years ago. The metal was scratched and worn, but it still kept perfect time. Tick, tick, tick it went, steady and sure. While all around her, digital clocks and quantum timers flashed with alien numbers, the old watch just kept ticking. She picked it up and held it close to her ear. The sound was comforting, like a heartbeat that never stopped. Back in the council chambers, the final vote was being counted. Out of 147 species in the Council, 123 had voted to expel humanity. Only 24 had voted for humans to stay, mostly smaller species that humans had helped in the past. Deho stood up slowly. The hall fell silent. Even the air recycling system seemed to quiet down. "Honored Council," he said, his voice carrying across the crystal hall. "Humanity accepts your decision. We will leave your space as requested. But before we go, I want to say something." Speaker Velthon looked annoyed. "The vote is finished, Human Ambassador. There is nothing more to discuss." "There is," Deho continued. "Dr. Minho Lee's research about time was not a trick. It was a warning. In 847 years, something terrible will happen to time itself. When that day comes, when your clocks start running slow and your children age in moments that feel like years, remember that humanity tried to warn you." High Commander Zethra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Human lies and human fear-mongering. Your species cannot accept that others do not need you." Deho picked up his simple briefcase. Inside was everything he owned that mattered. Pictures of his family, a letter from his daughter, and a small Earth-made calculator that he had used since childhood. "We will remember this day," he said. "All of us will remember." As he walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoed in the vast hall. Behind him, the aliens were already talking about other business, about trade routes and territorial disputes. They had already forgotten about the humans, but Dr. Minho Lee had not forgotten his research. Even as evacuation ships filled with frightened human families, he was still working. In his laboratory aboard the science vessel, Newton's Dream, he stared at equations that made his head hurt. The math was clear. Time was not as solid as everyone thought. It could be broken, and once it broke, only those who understood it deeply could fix it. 3 days later, the last human ship left Council, space. Captain Sojin Park's Defiance was among the final vessels to cross the boundary into the dark space beyond the galaxy's edge. As they passed the final navigation beacon, she looked back at the galaxy that had once welcomed humanity with open arms. "Captain," said Lieutenant Tae-Wan Jung, "all human vessels are accounted for. 3,400,000 people, successfully evacuated." "Any word from Ambassador Deho?" Sojin asked. "He's aboard the diplomatic transport with the last of our embassy staff. He wanted me to tell you something." "What?" "He said to tell everyone to keep their clocks wound. He said we're going to need to remember what real time feels like." Sojin looked down at her own watch, a simple mechanical device her grandmother had given her. It was still ticking steadily, just like it always had. She wondered what Deho meant about remembering real time. Behind them, the galaxy continued its business. The Council congratulated itself on removing the dangerous humans. Trade resumed, expansion continued. The great work of galactic civilization went on. But in the deep research labs of a dozen species, sensitive instruments began to record tiny, almost undetectable changes in the flow of time itself. Changes so small that they were dismissed as equipment errors, changes that Dr. Minho Lee's equations had predicted perfectly. The clock was ticking and nobody was listening to its warning. 50 years had passed since the Great Exile. Admiral Jun Sik Nam stood on the observation deck of New Terra Station, watching the construction ships work on another massive generation vessel. The ship was so big that it looked like a moving city, with gardens and schools and whole neighborhoods built into its hull. This was humanity's new home. The Outer Territories, a collection of space stations and artificial worlds built in the empty space beyond the galaxy's edge. No aliens lived here. No council laws applied here. Here, humans could build and research and grow without anyone telling them to stop. "Admiral," said Commander Eugene Lee, joining him at the viewport, "the Starbourne project will be ready for its first test flight next month. The ship can carry 500,000 people and sustain them for 500 years if needed." Junsik nodded. The generation ships were humanity's insurance policy. If something went wrong with their new home, these ships could carry human civilization to another galaxy entirely. "Good. How are the other projects coming along?" "The deep space scanning arrays are working perfectly. We can see everything happening in council space from here, and Director Han's temporal research facility is making breakthrough after breakthrough. June 6 smiled. Dr. Yoon-ji Han had taken over Dr. Min-ho Lee's work after the old scientist died 15 years ago. She was brilliant, maybe even more brilliant than Lee had been, and she was finding things that made even veteran space admirals feel worried. In the Temporal Studies Institute, Dr. Yoon-ji Han stared at readings that should not exist. Her instruments were detecting tiny changes in time itself, so small that most equipment could not measure them. But human-built chronometers were different. They had been designed to be incredibly sensitive because humans had always been obsessed with accurate timekeeping. "Director Han," said her assistant, Dr. Kang Min, "Park. The quantum temporal decay readings are getting stronger. The effect is definitely spreading outward from the galactic core." Yoon-ji rubbed her tired eyes. She had been working for 18 hours straight, but the work was too important to stop. "How fast is it spreading?" "About 3 light years per year. At this rate, it will reach the outer spiral arms in about 600 years. 600 years. Dr. Min-ho Lee had predicted 847 years until the Great Silence began. His math had been close, but not exact. The universe was breaking down faster than anyone had expected. "Kang Min," she said, "start working on the stabilization field theory again. If time is going to break, we need to figure out how to fix it." Meanwhile, in the shadow networks that connected the outer territories to Council space, Tae-min Yu was planning another rescue mission. He had once been a diplomat like Dae-ho Kim. Now he was something between a spy and a freedom fighter. There were still humans trapped in Council space. When the Great Evacuation happened, some people had been too far away to reach the pickup points. Others had been in prisons or hospitals. Some had simply refused to leave their homes. The Council had promised that these humans would be treated fairly, but that promise had not lasted long. "The intelligence is solid," said Mirai Shin, his second-in-command. "There are 300 humans being held in a work camp on Valthari Prime. They're being forced to maintain old human-built equipment that the Valthari can't figure out how to use." Taemin looked at the star charts. Valthari Prime was deep in Council space, surrounded by patrol fleets and defense platforms. Getting there would be almost impossible. Getting out with 300 rescued humans would be miraculous. "What about the underground network?" he asked. "Young E. Kim's people have been building support for years. They have safe houses and hidden transport routes. But the Valthari have been cracking down hard. 3 of our contacts were arrested last month. Young A. Kim was Ambassador Dae-ho's daughter. After her father died 5 years ago, she had dedicated her life to helping trapped humans escape Council space. She was smart and brave, but she was also taking terrible risks. On the trading world of Nexus 7, young A. Kim sat in a cantina that served drinks to a dozen different species. She looked like just another merchant, selling small electronic devices to alien traders. But hidden in those devices were communication chips that let scattered humans talk to each other without the Council knowing. "The shipment is ready," said the Hythan trader across from her. The Hythan looked like a giant spider, but they were one of the few alien species that still traded with humans secretly. 50 communication units untraceable by Council scanners." "Good," Young A replied, sliding a credit chip across the table. "My people need to stay in contact. Things are getting worse for humans here." The Hythan's eyes glittered. "The Council grows paranoid. They blame humans for equipment failures, for crop problems, for anything that goes wrong. It is not safe for your people here." Young A knew this better than anyone. Just last week, a human family had been arrested because a fusion reactor failed in their city. Never mind that the reactor was 200 years old and had been built by aliens. The humans were convenient scapegoats. Her wrist communicator buzzed, quietly. A message from the outer territories, coded and compressed. She read it quickly, then her face went pale. The temporal decay was accelerating. Back in the outer territories, Dr. Eun-ji Han was having an emergency meeting with Admiral Jun Sik, Nam and the other leaders of human space. "The situation is worse than we thought," she said, pointing to a holographic display of the galaxy. Red zones showed where time was beginning to slow down. "Look at these readings from the galactic core. Time is running 20% slower there than it should be." 20%? said Admiral Nam. "That's impossible. Someone would notice." "Not necessarily. The effect is gradual and affects everything equally. If your clocks slow down at the same rate as your brain, you don't notice that time is passing differently. Commander Inho Bay leaned forward. But our deep space sensors can detect it because they're outside the affected area. Exactly. We're like people standing on a riverbank watching the water flow by. The council species are like people floating in the river. They can't tell how fast. They're moving. The implications were terrifying. If time continued to slow down, entire star systems would become trapped in temporal bubbles. People would live normal lifespans from their perspective, but from the outside, they would appear to be moving incredibly slowly. "How long do we have?" Admiral Nam asked. "Before the effect reaches council space? About 50 years. Before it reaches us out here? Maybe 200 years, assuming it doesn't accelerate again." Admiral Nam was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question everyone was thinking. "Can we fix it?" Dr. Han hesitated. "Maybe." Dr. Lee's original research suggested that temporal fields could be stabilized if you understood the underlying quantum mechanics. We've been working on the theory, but we'd need to test it. Test it how? We'd need to create a controlled temporal anomaly and then try to fix it. It would be incredibly dangerous. If we made a mistake, we could make the problem worse. That night, Admiral Nam stood alone on his observation deck, watching the stars. 50 years ago, humanity had been thrown out of the galaxy for being too dangerous, too reckless with advanced science. Now, that same reckless curiosity might be the only thing that could save everyone. He thought about the message they had received from Young-E Kim. Council space was becoming more dangerous for humans every day. The aliens were afraid, and fear made people do terrible things. But there was something else in her message that worried him more. She had mentioned strange reports from traders, stories about star systems where ships arrived late, where communication delays were getting longer, where some planets seemed to be moving more and more slowly through their orbits. The Council still refused to listen to human warnings about time. They dismissed the reports as faulty equipment or human sabotage. But Admiral Nam knew better. The clock was ticking, and it was ticking slower every day. In her small quarters, Dr. Yoon-Ji Han worked late into the night, running calculations and simulations. The math was incredibly complex, involving quantum mechanics and relativity and theories that most scientists couldn't even understand. But hidden in all those equations was a glimmer of hope. If her theories were correct, it might be possible to build devices that could stabilize time in localized areas. They would be massive, expensive, and difficult to build, but they could work. The question was whether humanity would have enough time to perfect the technology before the Great Silence consumed everything. Outside her window, the lights of New Terra Station twinkled like stars. Millions of humans lived and worked in the outer territories now, building a new civilization from nothing. They had been exiled as dangerous primitives. Soon, they might be the galaxy's only hope for survival. 200 years had passed since humanity was forced into exile. Jinwoo Seo stood in the most advanced laboratory in human space, surrounded by machines that could measure the smallest changes in time itself. He was the great-grandson of Dr. Minho Lee, the scientist who had first predicted the Great Silence. Today, Jinwoo was about to prove that his ancestor had been right about everything. "Director Seo," said his research partner, Dr. Nari Lim, "the quantum temporal measurements are ready. Do you want to see them?" Jinwoo nodded. Nari activated the holographic display, and numbers filled the air around them. The numbers told a story that would have terrified anyone who understood what they meant. "The decay rate has increased by 300% in the last 50 years, Nari said quietly. "Time is breaking down much faster than your great-grandfather predicted." Jinwoo studied the data. Red zones on the galactic map showed where time was running slow. Yellow zones showed where the effects were just beginning. Green zones showed normal time flow, but there weren't many green zones left. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Before the effect reaches the outer spiral arms where most council species live? Maybe 30 years? Before it reaches us here in the outer territories? Perhaps 100 years." 100 years. It sounded like a long time, but Jinwoo knew it wasn't enough. Building the technology to fix a universe-wide temporal breakdown would take longer than that, unless they could find a shortcut. Nari, he said, show me the chronometer stabilizer designs again. Nari pulled up another set of holographic blueprints. The device looked like a cross between a fusion reactor and a giant clock. It was designed to create a bubble of stable time around itself, protecting everything within a certain range from temporal decay. The latest prototypes work perfectly, Nari said. We can stabilize time in an area up to 1 light year across. The problem is power requirements. Each stabilizer needs the energy output of a small star. What about the miniaturized versions? Those work too, but they can only protect areas about the size of a solar system. Still, they're much more efficient. Jinwoo smiled. Nari was brilliant, one of the best temporal engineers humanity had ever produced. If anyone could solve the power problem, it would be her. But even as they worked on their solutions, the situation in council space was getting desperate. Sang-Ho Jang crouched in the shadows of a Valthari military base, watching alien soldiers patrol the perimeter. He had been a spy for 20 years, living deep undercover in council space. Today's mission was different from his usual intelligence gathering. Today, he was trying to save lives. Inside the base were 50 human prisoners, captured during failed escape attempts. The Valthari had been executing captured humans for the past 5 years, claiming they were temporal terrorists, responsible for the time anomalies that were spreading across their empire. Perimeter guards are changing shifts in 10 minutes, whispered Hyo Jin Cho through his earpiece. She was a refugee who had escaped to human space years ago, but she had volunteered to come back and help with rescue missions. The human prisoners are being held in Building 7. Sang-Ho checked his equipment one more time. Human technology had advanced tremendously during the exile years. His tools were smaller, more powerful, and completely undetectable by Council security systems. Remember, he said, we need to move fast. Intelligence suggests the Valthari are planning to execute all human prisoners tomorrow. The rescue mission was risky, but not as risky as doing nothing. Every human death in Council space was a tragedy, but it was also a loss of valuable knowledge. Many of the trapped humans were scientists and engineers who understood how Council technology worked. Their expertise might be crucial in the years to come. Meanwhile, on the Valthari homeworld, panic was spreading through the government. Hi, Commander Zethra, now much older but still in power, stood before a holographic display showing the temporal anomalies spreading across his empire. How many systems have we lost to the time stutters? He demanded. 17 complete systems, sir, reported his science advisor, and 43 more are showing early signs of temporal instability. Time stutters. That's what the Valthari called the moments when time would freeze for seconds or minutes at a time. From the outside, affected areas looked normal, but for people inside, those frozen moments stretched out like hours. What do our scientists say about the cause? The science advisor hesitated. Sir, there are 2 theories. The first is that this is a natural phenomenon, some kind of cosmic aging process that affects space-time itself. And the second theory? That the humans somehow caused this before they were exiled, that their temporal research damaged the universe in ways we're only now seeing. High Commander Zeth Ra slammed his fist on the conference table. I knew those humans were dangerous. This proves it. But deep down, in a part of his mind he didn't want to acknowledge, Zeth Ra remembered Ambassador Daeho's final words to the Council. When that day comes, when your clocks start running slow and your children age in moments that feel like years, remember that humanity tried to warn you. The Valthari commander had dismissed those words as human dramatics. Now he was beginning to wonder if they had been a prophecy. In the Zephyrian collective, another council species was facing their own temporal crisis. The Zephyrians were an ancient race, millions of years old, with technology that most other species could barely understand. But even their advanced science couldn't explain what was happening to their space. Collective Mind Unit 7742 analyzed the data streams coming from the outer regions of Zephyrian space. 3 entire star systems had become temporal dead zones in the past year. Ships that entered those areas simply disappeared, their signals cutting off abruptly. Recovery missions had found the ships, still intact but frozen in time. The crews were alive but trapped between one moment and the next, unable to move or even blink. They looked like living statues, suspended in crystalline moments that might last forever. The Zephyrian Collective had tried everything to restore normal time flow to those areas. They had used their most powerful technology, their greatest scientific minds, their most advanced theories. Nothing worked. For the first time in millions of years, the Zephyrian Collective was afraid. Back in the Outer Territories, Dr. Jinwoo Seo received an encrypted message that made his blood run cold. It came from one of the few remaining human scientists still working in council space, hidden among alien research teams. The message was short. Council planning massive temporal research project. Believe humans cause time problems. Preparing. To use force to make humans fix it. Time running out. Jinwoo shared the message with the Human Leadership Council. The implications were terrifying. If the council species decided to blame humans for the temporal crisis, they might launch a military attack on the Outer Territories. How long until they could reach us? Asked Admiral Sunmi Kim, who had taken over from Admiral Nam 5 years earlier. With their fastest ships, about 6 months, replied Intelligence Director Wonho Sim. But if they're planning a major military operation, it would take them at least 2 years to organize. Dr. Nari Lim looked up from her calculations. In 2 years, the temporal decay will have spread much further. Their military might not even function properly by then. It was a grim kind of hope. The same force that threatened to destroy the universe might also protect humanity from council aggression. That night, Jinwoo Seo worked alone in his laboratory, running simulation after simulation. The math was clear. The universe was dying, and only humanity had the knowledge to save it. But would they be able to perfect the technology in time? He thought about his great-grandfather, Dr. Minho Lee, and the warning he had tried to give the council so many years ago. Lee had been ridiculed, dismissed, ignored. But he had been right about everything. Now it was Jinwoo's turn to carry on that work. The chronometer stabilizers were humanity's best hope for saving the universe, but they needed more testing, more refinement, more time. Time. The one thing the universe was running out of. In another part of the Outer Territories, young engineers and scientists worked around the clock on the Temporal Stabilization Project. They had grown up hearing stories about the Great Silence, about the exile, about the Council's betrayal. For them, this wasn't just science, it was revenge. They would save the universe that had thrown them away. They would prove that humanity wasn't the problem. They were the solution. But first, they had to survive long enough to finish their work. Outside the laboratory windows, the stars looked the same as they always had, but sensitive instruments could detect the truth. Even here in the space between galaxies, time was beginning to slow down. The Great Silence was coming, and the clock was running out for everyone. 400 years had passed since the exile, and the galaxy was dying. Kyung-Soo Lee, great-great-grandson of the scientist who had first predicted this disaster, stood before the Emergency Council of Human Leaders. The news he brought would change everything. "The situation is worse than our worst predictions," he said, pointing to a holographic map of the galaxy. More than half of it was now colored red, showing areas where time moved so slowly that entire civilizations were trapped in moments that lasted years. "How bad is it?" asked Admiral Yoon-Soo Park, commander of the human Deep Space Fleet. "The Valthari Empire's core worlds are experiencing time dilation of 90%. What feels like a day to them is actually 10 days in normal time. Their government has essentially stopped functioning because they can't make decisions fast enough to matter." The council members looked at each other with expressions of horror and grim satisfaction. These were the same Valthari who had led the vote to exile humanity. Now they were paying the price for their arrogance. "What about the other council species?" asked Dr. Mi-Jin Kwon, the current head of temporal research. "The Zephyrian Collective has lost 60% of their territory to complete temporal dead zones. The crystalline hive can barely maintain communication between their worlds because their signals take subjective months to travel distances that should take days." Kyung-Soo activated another display showing the edge of human space. "The good news is that our temporal stabilizers are working perfectly. Every human settlement is protected by chronometer fields that maintain normal time flow." Captain Soo-Jin Bae raised her hand. She commanded the exploration vessel Kronos Runner, one of the few ships capable of safely traveling through the galaxy's increasingly dangerous time streams. "Director Lee," she said, "my last mission into Council space was difficult. We found systems where entire planets are frozen in single moments. I watched a Valthari city where people were stuck mid-conversation, children suspended in mid-step, water frozen in mid-pour." The room fell silent. Everyone had heard reports like this, but hearing them from someone who had actually seen the temporal graveyards was different. "Were there any survivors?" asked Admiral Park. "Some. In areas where the time dilation is less severe. But they're trapped on their worlds. Any ship that tries to leave the stabilized zones immediately gets caught in the temporal currents and freezes." Dr. Mi-Jin Kwan stood up. "That's why we need to deploy the rescue stabilizers. We have the technology to save them." "Save them?" Admiral Park's voice was sharp. "These are the same species that threw us out of the galaxy. They called us dangerous. They executed our people. Why should we risk human lives to save them?" It was the question that had been dividing human leadership for months. They had the power to save the Council species, but did they have the obligation? Kyung-soo understood both sides of the argument. His family had suffered during the exile years. His great-great-grandfather had died ignored and dismissed by the very aliens who now needed help. But he also understood what Dr. Min-ho Lee would have wanted. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said quietly. "And because if we don't, we'll be no better than they were." Meanwhile, deep in Council space, Dong-hyun Park was living through humanity's greatest vindication and greatest tragedy. He had been undercover in Valthari space for 15 years, pretending to be a traitor while actually gathering intelligence for the human government. Today, he was standing in the ruins of what had once been the Galactic Capital. The great crystal halls where the Council had met were still there, but they were frozen in time. Alien delegates sat motionless in their chairs, caught in the middle of debates that would never end. Some had been trapped mid-sentence for subjective decades. "It's horrible," whispered Aries Song, a human refugee who had been trapped on this world when the temporal effects began. "At first, we thought it was just equipment malfunctions, the clocks running slow, communication delays. Then people started noticing that conversations were taking longer and longer." Dong-hyun nodded. He had read the reports, but seeing it was different. The temporal field here was so strong that every step felt like walking through thick liquid. His watch, protected by human temporal shielding technology, showed that he had been walking for 6 hours. But according to local time, only 20 minutes had passed. "How many humans are still trapped here?" he asked. "Maybe 300 scattered across the planet. Most are in the underground shelters, protected by the equipment we managed to salvage." Human technology was saving human lives even here, in the heart of enemy territory. The temporal shielding devices that human engineers had developed worked by creating small pockets of stable time, like air bubbles in a sinking ship. But they wouldn't last forever. "I have good news," Dong-hyun said. "Human rescue fleets are coming. Ships with full temporal stabilization technology." Aries' eyes filled with tears. "Really? After everything the Council did to us, humanity is still coming to help?" "That's what makes us human," Dong-hyun replied. On the world that had once been the Zephyrian Collective's greatest research center, Mi-young Kang faced an impossible decision. She was the head of humanity's ethics council, and she had been sent to evaluate whether the rescue mission should continue. The Zephyrians had been humanity's greatest enemies during the exile years. They had hunted down human refugees, destroyed human colonies outside Council space, and even attempted to develop weapons specifically designed to kill humans. Now, their greatest research station was a temporal graveyard. Millions of Zephyrian scientists were trapped in moments that stretched like centuries. Their collective consciousness, once spanning thousands of worlds, had been reduced to a few scattered outposts that could barely communicate with each other. "Ma'am," said Commander Jae-hyuk-yoon, captain of the rescue ship Temporal Guardian, "we could save maybe 2 million Zephyrians if we deploy our largest stabilizers here, but it would use up equipment that could save 10 million members of friendlier species." Mi-young stared at the frozen research station through the ship's viewports. Inside those crystal spires were the beings who had designed the weapons used to kill human children. They had shown no mercy when humanity was weak. But looking at them now, trapped and helpless, she felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Deploy the stabilizers, she said. All of them. Ma'am, are you sure? The Zephyrians made terrible choices, Mi-young interrupted. But that doesn't mean we have to. Back in the outer territories, Wan-ho Sim was analyzing the most disturbing discovery yet. His team had found ruins on the edge of human space, structures built by a civilization that had died out millions of years ago. The architecture matches no known species, reported Dr. Sung Jin Ha, the expedition's lead archaeologist. But the quantum dating shows these ruins are approximately 4 million years old. Wan-ho studied the holographic reconstructions of the alien buildings. They were beautiful in a strange way, with flowing curves and impossible geometries that seemed to bend space around them. What killed them? He asked. The same thing that's killing the galaxy now. We found temporal decay signatures in the ruins that match our current crisis exactly. The implications were terrifying. This had happened before. An entire galactic civilization had been destroyed by the same temporal breakdown that was now threatening everyone. But there was hope hidden in the ruins, too. They left records, Dr. Ha continued. Quantum crystal data storage that survived the temporal collapse. Most of it is corrupted, but we managed to recover one message. She activated a translation program, and alien text appeared in the air, converted to human language. Time is not infinite. The young species hold the key to salvation. We were too proud to listen to their warnings. Do not repeat our mistake. Trust those who understand time's true nature, even if they seem primitive. The ticking of simple clocks contains wisdom that advanced chronometers cannot match. Wan-ho read the message 3 times before its full meaning hit him. They're talking about us, about humanity. It looks that way. This ancient species knew that younger civilizations would have a different understanding of time, a more intuitive grasp of temporal mechanics. And they ignored that knowledge, just like the Council ignored Dr. Min-ho Lee's warnings. Dr. Ha nodded grimly. History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. As Wan-ho studied the ancient message, he thought about the old pocket watch that had belonged to Hyejin Choi, one of the first humans exiled from the galaxy. That simple mechanical device had kept better time than any alien chronometer, not because it was more advanced, but because it understood time in a more fundamental way. Human clocks didn't just measure time, they felt it, marking each second, with a physical tick that resonated with the underlying rhythm of the universe itself. Now, as the galaxy died around them, that simple understanding might be the key to saving everyone. The ancient aliens had learned too late that wisdom didn't always come from the most advanced civilizations. Sometimes it came from the species that others considered primitive. Sometimes it came from the outcasts who had been thrown away and forgotten. Sometimes it came from humanity. 600 years after the exile, the Great Silence had consumed most of the galaxy. Il-sung Choi, descendant of the engineer Hyejin Choi, who had first left council space with her grandfather's pocket watch, now served as humanity's prime coordinator. Today, he received a message that would have been unthinkable when his ancestor was young. The Galactic Council was surrendering. Prime Coordinator, said Communication Director Bo Young Nam. The transmission is coming from the Emergency Council, facility in the Outer Rim. It's a formal plea for aid. Il-sung looked at the holographic display floating above his desk. The signal was weak and broken, transmitted across thousands of light years through the wreckage of galactic civilization. But the words were clear. Enough. To the Human Outer Territories government, the message began. This is Acting Speaker Mel Vaughn of the Emergency Galactic Council. We formally request immediate humanitarian assistance for the preservation of galactic civilization. We offer complete sovereignty recognition, full territorial rights, and unlimited reparations in exchange for your temporal stabilization technology. Il-sung had to read the message twice to believe it. The proud species that had once called humanity dangerous primitives were now begging for help. How many council worlds are still functioning? He asked. According to their data, maybe 200 out of the original 40,000. Everything else has been consumed by temporal dead zones or extreme time dilation fields. 200 worlds. Once, the Galactic Council had ruled millions of star systems, commanded fleets that could destroy solar systems, and controlled technology that seemed like magic to younger species. Now they were refugees in their own galaxy. "What's the status of our rescue fleets?" Il-sung asked. Admiral H.I. Yoon appeared on the communication screen. She was the commander of humanity's deep space fleet, the largest military force in the known universe. But instead of conquest, her ships carried temporal stabilizers and rescue equipment. "Prime Coordinator," she said, "Operation Kronos Shield is ready to begin. We have 500 ships equipped with quantum temporal stabilizers, each capable of protecting an entire star system. Another 1,000 ships carry emergency supplies and evacuation equipment. How long will the operation take? To reach the major population centers and deploy basic stabilizers? About 2 years. To establish permanent temporal protection for all surviving worlds? Maybe 10 years? 10 years of humanity's greatest effort, using resources that had taken centuries to develop, all to save the species that had once tried to destroy them. There's something else," Admiral Yoon continued. "We're getting reports from our advanced scouts. The situation in Council space is worse than we expected." Il-sung waited for her to continue. "The Valthari homeworld is experiencing time dilation of 99%. What feels like a day to them is actually 3 months in normal time. Their government sent us a message asking for help 6 months ago, but from their perspective, they sent it yesterday. The numbers were staggering. Entire civilizations were trapped in temporal amber, living out their final days in slow motion while the universe moved on without them. On the front lines of the rescue operation, Gi-tak Han worked frantically to deploy a temporal stabilizer around the dying world of Karis Prime. He was a temporal engineer, one of the few humans trained to work directly with the dangerous energies that could either save or destroy entire solar systems. "Stabilizer field at 60%, reported his assistant, Engineer Hyo-sun Kim. "Temporal distortion is beginning to normalize." Through the ship's viewports, Gi-tak could see the planet below. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Cities were frozen mid-destruction, caught in the moment when temporal fields had first begun to collapse. Buildings hung in mid-fall, explosions suspended like deadly flowers, people trapped between heartbeats. "There," he said, pointing to a section of the planet's largest city. "I can see movement." It was true. As the temporal field stabilized, the frozen figures on the planet's surface were beginning to move again. Slowly at first, then faster as normal time was restored to their world. "How many people are down there?" Hyo-sun asked. "According to our scans, about 3 million. All of them were frozen for subjective decades. Gi-tak had seen this before, on other rescue missions. The people would emerge from their temporal prison confused and terrified, having experienced the passage of years as a single endless moment. Some would be insane from the experience. Others would be grateful just to be alive. All of them would owe their lives to the species they had once considered inferior. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Zektul the Valthari emerged from his house for the first time in what felt like forever. The sky was moving again. The clouds were drifting. The sun was actually setting instead of hanging motionless in one position. And there were ships in the sky. Strange ships with designs he didn't recognize. "Citizens of Karis Prime," came a voice from the ships, translated into perfect Valthari. "This is Captain Yunseo Park of the Human Rescue Fleet. You have been freed from a temporal distortion field. Please remain calm while we establish permanent protective barriers around your world." Human. The word sent a chill through Zektul's mind. Humans were the enemies, the dangerous ones who had been exiled centuries ago. But these humans had just saved his world. On another front, cultural anthropologist Bo-ram Kim was documenting the most ironic reversal in galactic history. She traveled with the rescue fleets, recording what happened when the primitive humans saved the advanced aliens. "Personal log, day 412 of Operation Kronos Shield," she spoke into her recorder. "Today we rescued the Zephyrian Research Station Omega-7. The Zephyrians were the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. They had computers that could think faster than light, energy sources that tapped into parallel dimensions, and weapons that could crack planets in half." She paused, looking at the rescued Zephyrians through the medical bay viewport. They were lying on human-built medical beds, being treated with human medicine, their lives sustained by human technology. They couldn't save themselves from a temporal anomaly that human science predicted 600 years ago, she continued. The irony is so complete it almost seems planned. But there was no satisfaction in her voice. The situation was too tragic for gloating. Billions of beings had died, entire civilizations had been erased from existence, and vast regions of the galaxy were now uninhabitable graveyards where time itself had stopped working. In the command center of the rescue fleet, Admiral HFY, Yoon faced a problem that no military commander in history had ever dealt with. How do you save people who don't want to be saved? Admiral, reported Captain Young-Ho Shin, the Thermal Collective is refusing our aid. They're claiming that accepting human help would be culturally degrading. HFY stared at the tactical display. The Thermal Collective's home system was surrounded by temporal dead zones. In maybe 5 years, the zones would expand enough to engulf their worlds completely. After that, they would be frozen forever. How many Thermal Collective members are we talking about? About 50 million across 3 worlds. 50 million people, choosing death over accepting help from humans. Send them another message, HFY ordered. Tell them we respect their decision, but we'll maintain rescue ships at the edge of their system. If they change their minds, we'll be ready. It was all they could do. Humanity had the power to save the Thermal Collective by force, deploying stabilizers around their worlds whether they wanted it or not. But that would make humans no better than the council species that had once imposed their will on others. Instead, they waited and hoped that pride wouldn't prove stronger than survival. Back in the Outer Territories, Prime Coordinator Il-sung Choi stood in the Memorial Gardens, looking at a monument that had been built decades earlier. It was dedicated to Dr. Min-ho, Lee, and all the other humans who had died in exile, unrecognized and ignored by the galaxy they had tried to save. The monument was simple. A large clock face with hands that moved in real time, surrounded by the names of the exiled dead. At the base was an inscription. They tried to warn us. We didn't listen. May we do better. But now, finally, the galaxy was listening. Il-sung reached into his pocket and pulled out an old mechanical watch. It had belonged to Hyejin Choi, his ancestor, and had been passed down through 6 generations of his family. The watch was still ticking, keeping perfect time after more than 6 centuries. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was steady and reassuring, a reminder that some things endured even when the universe itself seemed to be falling apart. Tomorrow, he would address the Emergency Council, the handful of surviving alien leaders who were trying to coordinate what remained of galactic civilization. They would thank humanity for the rescue operations. They would promise to do better in the future. They would swear that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Il-sung hoped they were sincere, but he also knew that hope wasn't enough. The papier clock was still ticking, and the work of rebuilding a galaxy was just beginning. 700 years had passed since humanity's exile from the galaxy. Seung-jae Lim, the elected galactic coordinator, stood in the Great Assembly Hall of New Geneva Station, addressing representatives from across the restored galaxy. The room was full, but it was much smaller than the old council chambers had been. There were fewer species now, and fewer worlds. Today marks the completion of the Great Restoration, Seung-jae announced to the assembled delegates. The last temporal dead zone has been stabilized. Time flows normally across all inhabited systems in the galaxy. The applause was polite, but subdued. Everyone understood the cost of this achievement. Vast regions of the galaxy were still empty, memorial, parks where entire civilizations had once thrived. The temporal graveyards would remain forever, monuments to the price of ignoring science and wisdom. However, Seung-jae continued, we must remember that this restoration was only possible because of the sacrifices made by countless beings, both human and alien. We must also remember that the threat is not entirely gone. Young-min, the leader of the Galactic Reconstruction Project, stood up in the audience. Coordinator Lim, can you explain the current state of the chronometer network? Seung-jae activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. Thousands of green dots marked the locations of temporal stabilizers, like a vast network of lighthouses, keeping time itself steady. The network consists of 47,000 temporal stabilizers, ranging from planetary-scale units to massive galactic core stabilizers. Each one requires constant maintenance and monitoring by trained temporal engineers. The majority of these engineers are human, though we are training members of other species as quickly as possible. An alien delegate raised a tentacle-like appendage. It was Ambassador Yelkith of the New Valthari Republic, one of the few surviving members of the species that had once been humanity's greatest enemy. Coordinator, Ambassador Yelkith said, "The Valthari people wish to express our continued gratitude for humanity's mercy. We know that we did not deserve salvation after our treatment of your species during the exile years." Sungjai nodded politely. The New Valthari Republic consisted of exactly 3 star systems, all that remained of an empire that had once controlled a quarter of the galaxy. They had learned humility the hard way. "The past is the past, Ambassador. We are focused on building a better future." But even as he spoke the diplomatic words, Sungjai knew that the scars of the past would never fully heal. Trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. In the deep research labs of the Temporal Studies Institute, Yanwu Ha made a discovery that changed everything humanity thought they knew about the Great Silence. She was young, born after the crisis had ended. Part of the generation that had grown up in a galaxy where humans were respected and feared in equal measure. "Director Park," she said to her supervisor, "I've found something disturbing in the quantum analysis of the temporal decay patterns." Director Minjun Park looked up from his own research. He was one of the original temporal engineers who had worked on the rescue missions decades earlier. "What kind of disturbing?" The Great Silence wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was caused by artificial interference with the universe's temporal structure. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. If Yanwu was right, it meant that some species had been experimenting with time on a scale large enough to damage the universe itself. "Are you certain?" Director Park asked. "The quantum signatures are unmistakable. Over the course of millions of years, various species conducted temporal experiments that gradually weakened the universe's chronological framework. The effect was cumulative, like tiny cracks in a wall that eventually caused the whole structure to collapse." Director Park was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question they were both thinking. "Which species?" "All of them. The Valthari with their time compression drives, the Zephyrians with their temporal computational networks, the crystalline hive with their chronological communication systems. Even some human experiments from before the exile contributed to the damage. The implications were staggering. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy had unknowingly contributed to nearly destroying the universe. The very technologies that had made galactic civilization possible had also made it unsustainable. "We need to inform the Galactic Assembly," Director Park said. "They need to establish new laws governing temporal research." Meanwhile, on the Memorial World of Remembrance, Heiwan SEO served as the galaxy's first interspecies temporal coordinator. Her job was to ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Remembrance had once been a thriving industrial world with a population of 15 billion. Now it was a park where visitors could walk through frozen cities and see the final moments of a civilization caught by the Great Silence. "The new cosmic accords will establish strict limits on all temporal research," she explained to a group of young scientists from various species. "No experiment that could affect space-time on a scale larger than a single solar system. No temporal communication across distances greater than 1 light year. No time travel research of any kind." A young Zephyrian scientist raised a question. "But Coordinator CEO, how will we advance our understanding of the universe without pushing the boundaries of temporal science?" Heiwan smiled sadly. "Very carefully. The universe has shown us what happens when we push too hard. Sometimes wisdom means knowing when to stop." They walked past a frozen playground where alien children were suspended mid-play, their laughter trapped in crystalline silence. The sight never failed to remind visitors why the new laws were necessary. "Remember," Heiwan continued, "time is not infinite. It's a finite resource that must be protected. The ancient species that died out millions of years ago learned this. Too late. We must do better." In the restored worlds of the former council space, life was slowly returning to normal. But it was a different kind of normal, one where humans held ultimate authority over the most fundamental force in the universe. On New Valthar, former High Commander Zethra's great-great-grandson, Pelzeth, worked as a maintenance technician on one of the human-built temporal stabilizers. It was honest work, but it was also a daily reminder of how much his people had fallen. "The temporal field is stable. he reported to his human supervisor, Engineer Tae-young Lee. All readings are within normal parameters. Tae-young nodded approvingly. Good work, Pelzeth. Your people have become excellent technicians. It was meant as a compliment, but Pelzeth couldn't help but feel the irony. Once, the Valthari had been warriors and conquerors. Now they were technicians and caretakers, maintaining machines built by the species they had once dismissed as primitives. But they were alive, and that was more than many species could say. In the outer territories, now the heartland of galactic civilization, Junho Choi stood in the memorial gardens looking at the monument to the Great Silence. He was the great-grandson of Il-sung Choi, and he held in his hand the same pocket watch that his ancestor Hye-jin had carried when humanity was first exiled. The watch was ancient now, over 7 centuries old, but it still kept perfect time. Tick, 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 steady and reliable, marking each second with mechanical precision. A group of school children walked past, a mix of human and alien youngsters learning about galactic history together. Their teacher was explaining the importance of the memorial. This monument reminds us that time is precious, the teacher was saying. Every second that passes is a gift that should not be wasted. The beings who died during the Great Silence ran out of time because their leaders made bad choices. One of the human children raised her hand. Teacher, why did the aliens not listen when our ancestors tried to warn them? The teacher, an elderly Zephyrian who had lived through the crisis, considered the question carefully. Because, child, they thought they knew better. They believed that being more advanced meant being more wise. They forgot that wisdom can come from unexpected places. Junho smiled and continued his walk through the gardens. Near the center of the memorial was a large clock tower, its face visible from anywhere in the park. The clock had no numbers, just a simple dial with moving hands that marked the passage of time. At the base of the tower was the inscription that had become humanity's motto in the new galactic order. Time teaches all things to those who live long enough to learn. But there was another inscription, smaller and older, that few people noticed. It was carved into a simple stone bench near the base of the tower, words that had been written by Dr. Min-ho Lee himself centuries ago. The universe speaks to those who listen. It whispers its secrets in the ticking of clocks, the turning of planets, the beating of hearts. We ignored these whispers at our peril. May future generations be wiser than we were. Junho sat on the bench and listened to his pocket watch tick. In the distance, he could hear the great clock tower chiming the hour, its bells carrying across the memorial park and beyond, a reminder to all the galaxy that time was still flowing, still precious, still worthy of respect. The Council had betrayed Earth and forced humanity into exile. They had dismissed human warnings as primitive superstition. They had nearly destroyed the universe through their arrogance and pride. But in the end, time had taught them all the same lesson. Wisdom didn't come from being the strongest or the most advanced. It